All right, welcome back, everybody. We are now, man, I get actually really excited when we talk about different stories. And I just met Garry. I met him through Steve. Steve is one of our co-founders. But this is actually an interesting conversation that we're going to have because it's different than a lot of the other ones that we start with the childhood and move into some other things. We're talking about a very specific thing. But before we kind of jump into all of those things, and maybe I should just kind of tease a little bit. I mean, we're going to talk about alcohol, which could be a polarizing topic. We've got a lot of individuals that have listened that have been part of AA and have had abstinence, and they've done a lot of different things that way. But this is a different situation, different scenarios. So you're going to have to stay tuned to listen, right? That's why we'll tease it with that. Anyway, let's jump into this aspect. First of all, Garry, thanks for being here. Thank you for taking the time to share and encourage and actually work with us to be able to talk to many others. But let's start with who is Garry? Because I want to make sure that we kind of get that little bit of an introduction. People maybe get to know you first because nobody's met you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on, Tim. I'm Garry. I'm a serial entrepreneur, born and raised here in Michigan, Grand Rapids area. Studied finance at Grand Valley State University. Just out of college, I met my lovely wife. We've been married now for 14 years. I do know the date, do know 14 years. My wife is listening. She'll test me on that. We've got four little kids, four little ones at home, including a baby we just had. So,
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. And then, from a business side, I've got quite a few different businesses, mostly in the mobile device repair and refurbishing space. I'm also in real estate, and now I do a lot of investing and coaching and advising other entrepreneurs.
Awesome.
So that's my big passion.
So if you would say this is the one thing that I identify as, what would you pick out? And I know if your wife's listening, you better say something. I identify as the husband to my wife.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say dad. I would say dad first and foremost. But from a business side, I'm definitely a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah. So. The other thing too is interesting. You're saying the dates and stuff. So can you actually give the time, the date of when all of your kids were born and where you were at? I mean, can you go that detailed? I'm not that detailed. So just to be clear, I often forget my kids' birthdays. My wife has to remind me because I can't remember them.
I developed a good system to remember the birthday, so I'm in a good spot there. Time and place might take me a little bit. But
there you go.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun though, and I love the fact. I mean, you're in a stage in a season that's exciting to watch them grow and develop, and then they develop their personality. So that's always fun and exciting. So, all right, so here we go into the conversation in regards to you made a choice to give up alcohol, and this wasn't necessarily anything that had to do with AA. There wasn't an abusive situation where the alcohol was ruling your mind and everything else, but it was really more for health benefit and for physical benefits and you're breaking a narrative that in our society, it's almost necessary to social drink. And I know you attend a lot of conferences and events, and when you're out in the evenings working with clients, it's almost necessary to have a drink or partake in that. But you're actually making the choice. So let's go back to the beginning of this and kind of give the background of what you were doing and why you felt it was necessary to social drink. And then we can kind of go through the transition of what was going on in your mind. And then now, how is it affecting you? And what are the things that are going on that you found for positive?
Yeah, no, sure. So if we kind of go back, it's interesting, my parents actually growing up didn't drink any alcohol. So we didn't really have any alcohol around the house. But I think as a kid, that made me want to try it more, I would say. So I actually, went out and partied a good amount when I was in high school, even 16, 17, and started drinking then. Actually, you'll appreciate the entrepreneur in me. I remember actually I would buy a fifth and I would start selling shots to make extra money on it back then. That sounds really bad, but it's true. I just remember that as we're sitting here talking. But, I think, so much for me, it wasn't like that I ever really thought about it. It was for so many years, it was just something that you do. It's a normal thing when you go out. It's you pick between beer wine or liquor essentially, right? When you're going to, going to have a drink, and when you're with people, or when you're out on the boat or out at the beach, it's just something that you do, So it wasn't ever something I honestly thought about too much up until, really probably 4 or 5 years ago. And
So,
that's,
so here's an interesting thought, though, and just I don't want to jump over this too quickly, but
yeah,
you mentioned the fact that it's just not something that you ever thought about, but you just basically accepted. And this is what we talk about all the time: is the narratives. You accepted that the narrative was this is just something that we do.
right,
There wasn't necessarily, and you probably, I mean, if you sat and thought, you could probably think back to either a situation or what somebody said, or possibly a social. But that's what we learn is we just accept things, and whether that's experience or situational, circumstantial, doesn't matter. We just accept that.
right, right, 100%. We do, and I actually had one of my really good friends, Tony Stancato. He didn't drink alcohol, and he gave it up. He used to. And I'll let him tell his story at some point, but he gave up alcohol a long time ago, 14, 15 years ago, something like that. And I always thought it was a little strange that he didn't drink. I was like, huh, maybe I guess he had a problem or something, but I don't think he really did either. So it was almost like one of those things that's like, it's weird, you don't drink, you don't want to, kind of have a good time with me almost. Like it felt a little strange at first. So it was like so far ingrained, right, that I was like, I was thinking about it like, oh, it's weird that you don't drink, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, so I remember, I remember even going that far. So,
Have you sat and actually thought about the fact of how you've blindly accepted that as part of what has to be?
um,
I'm just curious. I mean, because this is,
yeah,
I mean, for those listening, it could be something completely different. It could be anything that you've just like, oh yeah, that's just how we do it. And let me share this part because this is the most comical one: is the fact that you have the grandmom that slices the ends off the ham, and then the mom does it, and then the daughter does it, and then the daughter asks the mom like, why did we slice the ham? I don't know. It's just the way my mom did it. My mom did, and then they go all the way back. That well, I didn't have a pan big enough for the ham, and that's why we sliced the ends off of it, right? So, we just accept these things sometimes and we don't ever question. So that's like,
yeah.
where is your brain at when you're thinking about that and kind of looking back on some of that?
Honestly, I look back and I say, why the heck didn't I question it? I don't. I have no idea. It's just so much like my. And I think and this is like, it's like this for so many different things. It's like the people that you surround yourself with are the ones that, really are the ones that might help question it, whether it's a mentor, close friend, or family member, or something like that. But I didn't have one of those people, I guess, really, that ever, really pushed it. I mean, I mentioned Tony, but he was maybe the only one, and he didn't really, wasn't able to push me hard enough, I guess, to really think about it. But, it was like, oh, my parents ended up, occasionally drinking for sure, and my brother and all my friends and my business partners, and so at every business event and networking event, it was like 99% of people do it unless you had a serious addiction and problem, and then
Right.
you don't. So it was like the only way it made sense to not drink, or the only way it was acceptable is if you had some sort of addiction issue,
Right.
and even still today, you know, and like I said, I don't feel like I, was really addicted. I definitely had a craving, like a lot of people on a, Friday or Saturday, but I don't feel like I really had an addiction. But for me to say that I'm like 6 months sober, I think it would be like, it'd have such a stigma to it that like I must have had an addiction, or I must have had like a serious problem. So, I think it really just comes down to your network and the people that you're around, or maybe, if you're listening to the right podcasts, this one or other ones that may really question the norms of society. But unfortunately, they were so ingrained in me for so long. It took me a long time to step out of that and to think about it. So it is crazy to reflect back and say, hey, why didn't I ever like really seriously think about this decision that I was making to put a poison, a toxin, right? I mean, it's toxic for our body, right? To put this into my body consistently, right? And so I really look back and I don't know why I didn't think about it, but it's true. I really didn't. So
Well, and not only not to think about it, but then to look at somebody else and
right,
question the reality of their life of,
right,
like you
right,
said, with Tony, I mean, like, okay, he's not drinking, but he's not necessarily in AA, and it wasn't that level.
right,
And it's
right,
like you said, it's just interesting to interesting to see how quickly our minds just blindly accept what social tells us
Right.
we can and can't do versus like, okay, how do we actually make the decision for ourselves? How do we critically think through whatever it is, whether you're putting stuff into your body physically or whatever? So what triggered or what started this whole process or this whole thought of, well, hey, maybe I don't need to drink. Maybe I can set that aside. Maybe I can go sober. Was there something, a situation, circumstances, or where were you at?
Really, it was me just wanting to start to look at all the different aspects of my life, alcohol being one of them, and say, you know what, I want to just take back control of anything, anything that, I haven't thought about. And so for me, it was just really trying to get my health and wellness in a really good spot. And I think starting to have kids and seeing my kids watch what I'm doing, I think there's got to be somebody in the family that breaks that generational mold and that generational habit. So it just, I had a lot of drinks over COVID, like I think many people did. The Thursday, Friday happy hours and Saturday out, with our friends on the beach and whatnot. And so it started to definitely take its toll on me. I felt like I added on, the COVID 10 or 15 pounds, right, and weight that a lot of us did. And I started to feel sluggish and just a little bit more lethargic. And I think it was really starting to impact the next day quite a bit, and it's like, gosh, it's impacting my time with my kids. I'm just not being the dad or the parent that I want to be. So it was just really after COVID when I started to reflect on that. And then it was also like, you know what, my kids are seeing me drink alcohol, and is that something that I really want them to do? And then started realizing, you know what, I got to break this mold of like it being okay. And so it really, I did it for my own health, but I did it to show my kids there's a different way to have fun. You don't need alcohol to have fun and
Right.
meet with people.
So what would you say would be the greater influence on that? The influence of being a dad and saying, hey, I want to use this as a teaching tool to be able to say you don't have to have it, and maybe they're both equal, I don't know, or the other influence of saying, hey, I need to get myself to perform at a higher level, at more of a peak type situation. Like,
At first, it was driven by my personal health and wanting for me to be, peak dad and really improve my, overall well-being. And then after I started, I stopped drinking entirely. I was able to kind of reflect, and actually, this just happened. Like, was going to Target, run some errands, had all my boys with me while my wife was at home with our daughter. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. We're out of NA beers, non-alcoholic beers. And so it was pretty cool. I put them in the cart, and I'm telling the kids like, yeah, Dad doesn't drink anymore, and so this is, a choice that I've made, and I don't want to put that poison or toxin in my body. And so it was kind of cool for me to be able to say that to them, like, man, I made this choice. This is a positive choice, but it's a choice that we all have to make. It's not a given that you're supposed to do this, right? And so that was a cool moment for me, but it didn't happen until after I made the personal health decision on my own first, and then I was like, all right, this is good. This is good. I'm going to do this for my kids. I'm going to break this generational train that is there of like it being a norm to drink in our family.
So you mentioned something earlier a little bit about the fact of you felt it was a way to be able to take back control. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because you're looking at it and saying, okay, I need to take a little bit of control over back. Did you feel like something was going wacko or way out of line, or maybe a little bit off course?
For me, it's like, and this is part of the reason I'm in business, but I'm a control freak. I like to have control of, my time, my freedom, my energy, my life, right? And so if I feel like there's any single thing that is really impacting it, it's a pretty big issue for me. And so, I felt like the drinking that I, was doing on the weekends was bleeding into the next day. And for me, so it was like, it was a control from that side of like, what, I don't feel like I need this, and it's really starting to impact and bleed into other things. And I will say too, like I'm the type of person that likes to like give up stuff occasionally. And so actually that same friend, Tony, and I, we used to give up every year, we used to give up something. Like one year it was like pop. We're not going to drink any pop. And for some reason, I used to like Pop Tarts. So we're like, all right, we're giving up Pop Tarts. Here was pizza, which that was a rough year. I liked pizza for sure. Still do enjoy pizza, but we kind of started to train ourselves to like give up different things. And so with alcohol, every year I'd probably give it up in January and do like a dry January type of thing, and sort of just kind of test it. But I like being in control of that, and so I wanted to be able to make the choice, and it just got to a spot for me where it was like, you know what, it just isn't worth it anymore. There's just really hardly any good that comes out of it, and it's all this downside and bad. So that's what I mean from a control side.
So can I flip the script on you?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this whole aspect, because I'm speaking from personal experience, just so we're clear, because I've dealt with this a lot. There's a good side and a bad side to that whole control, because sometimes we attempt to control things that are not controllable, things that are outside of our control. And then we raise our anxiety and we raise a lot of things. And I liken it, you sound like you're an entrepreneur, so I'll just liken it to this. And I used to do a lot of sales, and it was interesting because I felt like I could actually control their decision whether they were going to buy or not buy. And the reality is I have no control over what's going on in their mind. I can influence and I can sometimes manipulate if I really, really work hard, which is obviously not healthy either. So does that control, do you have challenges with that control aspect? Is that something that you deal with on a regular basis, or is it, and maybe you don't want to talk about it because like I said, I'm flipping the script here on you a little bit. So
hey, this isn't a part of the plan. No, I definitely do. Yeah, it's a challenge for me every single day. And there's a lot of times where I have to tell myself, hey, that's just something out of my control. Is it really worth spending the time or energy or effort on? And so I try to, as much as possible, put my controlling nature and focus it on those things that I can control, like deciding not to drink, or personal health, or deciding to go in the ice bath in the morning, or whatever it is, right? So I can focus on those things. So I do as much of that as I can, but
So how do you handle the things that are outside of your control then? How do you refocus yourself in a situation so that you don't have all of that? I mean, we're talking about personal health, and the reason why I'm actually going down this road is there's a deeper reason, obviously, but sometimes when we attempt to control things, that has a greater impact from the stress, the anxiety, and things that we don't actually know all the impact of stress that it has on our physical health. And sometimes the ability or the attempting to control things that are outside of our control increases that stress exponentially, which then has a lot of negative effects on our physical countenance, emotional stability, the ability to handle relationships and be present. Like all of those things kind of come into play. Mm-hmm. So how do you, I guess, control your control? How do you control the controlling tendencies?
That's a tough thing. I mean, for me, I think what it comes down to is having a lot of the right relationships to honestly just talk through these different situations or the challenges that I'm running into, and make sure I stay balanced, whether it's, some good time with my wife to talk through it, mentors, close friends, those sort of things. I feel like for me, an important part of every day is to get up and exercise. I love to lift weights and go for a run. Frequently use, as I mentioned earlier, my cold tub or sauna and some of that sort of stuff. So I try to start out the day with some sort of physical activity, and that kind of helps clear my mind, I guess, of some of that, push myself, and just make me feel a whole heck of a lot better. So I feel like it starts with that, which is probably an odd thing to say when you're talking about control, but it's for me, that helps me get started right, and then just really talking through it. But I think knowing that I have a control issue was an important part of it.
The first step.
And that helped me at work. So I honestly, so like my structure at work, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the entrepreneurial operating system, but we run our company on EOS, and so we have a certain organizational structure that goes with that, where I sit in the visionary seat, and then I have an integrator that runs the day-to-day of the business. So I, really gave him a lot of control in the business, and actually that's so phenomenal. In EOS, they call it, letting go of the vine and trusting, right, and trusting in that individual. And so um, that's felt good, but it took me a long time to get to that
Yeah.
place where I was able to give up control and trust, and have the right people, but to do that. So that, so I've intentionally set up my, structure there, to better position myself for that.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I have two things then, and I kind of want, I'll give you the choice on which direction you want to go. But you also
Yeah.
mentioned something about it's not a given. And I kind of played in on or focused in on that phrase because that's what you were talking to your boys. This is not a given. In other
Mhm.
words, things that we are told are socially acceptable or this has to be, it's not necessarily a given that it has to be this way. Is there that is there any way to expand on that? In other words, is there any way to take a look at that and say, this is the way to look at my life and say, okay, it's not a given?
Mhm. Hmm. Well, cool. Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah. So again, you mentioned this with your boys. You were saying like, hey, it's not a given that you have to drink,
Right.
and we use those words, and I think that we use them very quickly and don't realize the depth through which they actually carry. Because it's not a given that you have to drink, and I'm kind of looking at it from a perspective of there is quite a bit of depth of thought that goes behind that, even though we say it casually on its surface, but there's a
Mhm.
lot of thought that process that goes back into it because now you're saying, well, it's not a given on a social norm to be and act and do. That's just not a given. So how do you get yourself in a state to be able to say,
Mm.
okay, this is not a given? And then how do you pass that along?
Right. Right. Yeah, I think to get yourself in that state, I mean, it certainly, like as I mentioned, it took me a number of years to get into that state, and for me, alcohol was only one part of the decision, but I got into this state of mind where it was like, you know what, I need to question like everything. I started realizing more and more that, the media, marketing, societal norms, the food pyramid, all of these things, right? All of these things, there's money behind all of that, right? There's a lot of money to be made, and so I need to really start questioning, everything. Why is it that I am eating this? Why is it that I'm consuming this type of media source? And so I started really. It was for me. This was a big reflection, and I think COVID helped really push me in this direction of like, hey, I just need to really start questioning like almost everything that's out there. It's like so I just realized how much money all these manufacturers of all beer and all this other type of product were starting to make and off of me too, right? So I was like, gosh, you know what? I think as a society, there's a ton of money to be made behind this, right? And so they're going to keep pushing it, even though it's a really bad thing for me, right? And so for me, I just got into this spot where it was like I started to see enough. Evidence that I needed to question more and more items and start digging deeper and deeper into the facts. And it was kind of like one thing just really led into another to say,
Mm,
I need to question, I need to start questioning everything that I put into my body,
yeah.
honestly. And so for me, my wife and I, we look at our bodies and say, okay, hey, how were we designed, by God and whatever belief you had from several centuries ago? How are we made to live on the land, right? And so for us, it's everything has been trying to get back to as natural as we can possibly get it.
Mm,
And so seeing that, and evidence, more and more evidence that, and obviously in my opinion, that is more natural to how we were wired and our bodies were designed and evolved over time, the better that it is and healthier that we will be, and the likely happier and the longer we'll live, right? And so for me, it was just really starting to question everything, like I
yeah.
said, everything that I do, and put into my body, basically.
So how do you now operate your own life? How do because you're choosing the narrative of I'm not going to put alcohol, and then it actually sounds like you added on top of that. I also want to be careful of what I put into my body. Get back to some natural foods. Check out the food pyramid that we were taught as kids. That
Hmm.
whatever.
Right.
How are you choosing to live now? And what impact are you seeing? Like positive impact are you seeing in
Yeah.
your own life?
Right. Yeah. So For us, essentially we're eating, higher protein, a lot of home cooked foods, eat out very little, a lot of fruits and, good fruits and vegetables, but it's all about balance every single day. And then, like I said, no alcohol, obviously no tobacco, drugs, I mean, no antibiotics, none of that. Right. And so for us, and we, we are very intentional about spending a good amount of time outside in nature. Sitting here in my office, like I'm outside, like walking around on the phone all the time, right? Like I'm trying to be outside and in
Yeah,
nature all the time. And so for me, I feel like it's just helped my overall, my stress levels a ton. I feel just a lot happier, a lot healthier. I've got good, consistent energy throughout the day. So that feels good. I'm able to go to bed, pretty quickly. Like it doesn't take me a long time to fall asleep. I feel
yeah,
like I get a good night's sleep. I'm able to get up in the morning and feel pretty charged, pretty recharged, and go, feel good, playing with my kids, doing all those things that I need to do. So
yeah.
certainly not perfect, and I'm continuously trying to, reevaluate everything that I'm doing.
Absolutely.
So it's like one step at a time, though.
So everybody, I mean, this is the $1 million question: is how is it impacting the business then? Because as you go to social events, what's kind of just like you said earlier,
Sure.
when you looked at Tony, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know about that dude. Like something's a
Right.
little bit off with him. I mean, do you kind of get that response a little bit, or do you? I mean, like how are people responding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, maybe, and it, quite honestly, I might not know exactly what everybody's thinking, right?
That's very true too.
So that's possible.
That's something
Um,
outside of our control, right? We'll go back to that. We'll just leave it outside of our control.
exactly. Yeah, it's outside of my control. I think for the most part, I'm able to explain my story a bit to people, and
Mm,
I'm pretty open out on social media. And so there's a lot of people on social media that have seen me posting a bit about my journey. A lot of people in my close network and posting on it and celebrating it, and that's given me even more confidence. Honestly, like almost every post gets a ton of impressions, and I have a lot
mm.
of people reaching out to me and just saying, "Hey, I didn't know you quit drinking. I just gave it up a couple months ago, or I haven't drank in 10 years." That's so awesome. So it's starting to become a trend. And actually, if you look at non-alcoholic beer sales, I mean, they've just been killing it. They've been on a huge growth
Mm.
trajectory over these last couple of years. I think so many people had a lot to drink during COVID, and then they saw the negative impacts on it, and are like,
Yeah.
"Geez, I need to rethink this." So, when I go to a lot of social events, I also don't know if everybody realizes if it's like a larger networking event, people aren't really realizing. And a lot of times I'm ordering a non-alcoholic beer. I enjoy the taste of a beer. And there's a lot of good options out there. There didn't used to be a ton of good ones. Athletic has some great non-alcoholic beers, for example, that taste pretty good, just with zero alcohol, and they're like half the calories too. So it's a good setup. But
Yeah.
usually I'm able to kind of talk through it with people like, hey, I just made a choice. I want to live a healthier life. And this is a part of, this me being completely natural and getting rid of all this. And so I've gotten a positive response. I think the stigma is starting to slowly fade
Mm.
away. I really do. I'm seeing it more and more, and the trend is moving up where people are moving into my camp where they were just a casual drinker and decided, you know what, the benefits really don't outweigh the risks and downside to drinking. And so I think the trend is really growing quite a bit and going in the positive direction there. So I think the stigma is starting to fade. It's always a little bit odd when I run into somebody I don't know at all. And then, that I have to kind of like,
And you go back into the story.
yeah, explain the story a little bit
But
more.
then
They don't.
people remember you too, so it's almost like a brand.
They do. They do remember me quite a bit more. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. So no,
Makes
it's a
you a
good.
more interesting person.
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
how
But I,
can individuals? Well, maybe let me, because I always do this for everybody else, and I need to do the same thing for you. So, out of everything that we talked about, and I know this is kind of a different interview, but out of everything we talked about, is there anything that's on your heart that you're like, I just need to share this one thing, or I need to kind of reemphasize this one point? Is there? I want to give you the opportunity to do that.
yeah, no, thank you. I think it goes back to really what I said earlier. It's um, take a look at your inputs. Take a look at the media that you're consuming, Take a look at your close circle of friends. Take a look at the food, the water, the air that you're putting into your body. Take some time to think about that, all this stuff that you're consistently consuming, right? And slowly start to work at the things that you know are really not good. And then start to replace them with more positive things. And then slowly move on the spectrum until you get to a spot where you've gotten rid of a lot of those big things. And so I would just take some time, literally like try to get outside in nature and just sit and think without any technology and think about your inputs. That would be the biggest thing that I would tell people. And for me, some of the earlier inputs were getting rid of social media. So you'll see me only on LinkedIn. That's the only platform I use. I'm not on Twitter, well, X, I guess, Facebook, Instagram, any of those other platforms. So that's one of the earlier inputs I got rid of. And then I pretty much don't listen to any news or any other media as well. That was another earlier thing. It's just so much negativity that comes with that. And I was very intentional about who I spend, my time with and my close network of friends. And then now, obviously, really looking at all the health and wellness inputs that are going into my body. So
Yeah.
that would be the biggest thing. Take some time to review those inputs.
I love that. I love that. So you're only on LinkedIn. Is that the way you would like to have people get in contact with you if they had questions or like, hey, what's the impact and this is how effective? Is that good?
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah,
We'll
that's
put
the
that
only
in the
place.
notes for anybody listening, but we can find Garry on LinkedIn and we'll have that link in the notes. So if you missed it, you can definitely get contacted there. Anything else? We're good?
No, thanks again for having me. This is great. A lot of fun.
Yeah, so those that are listening again, we're going to put stuff on YouTube. We encourage you to follow us on the socials that Garry is not on because that's where we find a lot of people. So Instagrams and some of the other areas because we want to put some of the shorts out there. But no matter what you're doing, make sure that you're looking and being intentional about the decisions that you're making in your life. And the intentionality then translates into your story, and that's the narrative that you craft. And we want each and every individual to make sure that you are crafting and creating the story that you are intentionally making because everybody's story matters. So until next time, take it easy and keep writing that story.